Hi, everyone, and welcome to MLive's Facebook Live. I'm Dana Afana here with Ann Arbor Police Chief Michael Cox, who is here to answer some questions about police brutality in response to the Black Lives Matter protests and how his department responds to these situations. Chief Cox, good afternoon, and thanks for being here.
Thank you very much for having me. Yes.
Thank you. I want to kick off this conversation by talking about the Black Lives Matter and George Floyd protests. What do you feel when you see everything going on regarding George Floyd's death and the protests? And how do you feel about the nationwide stance decrying police brutality?
I mean, it is sad, and it is sad for so many different reasons. Personally, it's sad for me. It's sad for the nation. Police departments certainly in the last 20 years, or certainly I'll say 10 years, have tried to evolve. Certainly some places have tried to change, have worked really hard, have hired so many more dedicated police that are really doing it for this job for the right reasons. And then you get an absurd incident like what happened to Mr. Floyd, and it just takes us back in time, and it's just sad in general because personally I've been through something similar, and it's hurtful and it's hard to explain. I've worked in the police department for over 31 years, and most of the time that I've been in policing, it's been about wanting to give back, to the public, wanting to help people, and also wanting to make sure the profession that I've been doing evolves, it gets better and meets the public's expectations, and because there's so many good people that actually do this job, but the bad apples seem to dominate, what the rhetoric is about this job. And that being said, that really has nothing to do in comparison to the hurt that these incidents do to people, communities, never mind the individual victims, that have succumbed to police violence. So I certainly think it's important for anyone and everyone in law enforcement to stand up for what's right when they see something that's wrong, particularly like in this case, and to do everything that they can to help our profession grow and develop and meet the public's expectations. There's so many of us that do on a daily basis, but we just can't allow, the individuals, the small number that are out there doing this, to dominate the rhetoric about police work.
Mm-hmm. And what are your thoughts on all these videos all over social media and the internet of protesters, being taken down and being handcuffed by police, even journalists, for that matter?
Well, it doesn't matter. Well, it always matters. It's hard for me to put myself in some of those places because some of those are pretty good sized cities, and the number of protesters were very large in general. And I want to separate the difference between people who are out there protesting about a horrific event, peacefully and wanting to send a message, and then there's groups of people that were mixed in there, similar to what I call the bad apples in the police departments. There were bad apples within the protester group that were doing things and which probably required the police to act in some way, shape, or form. And one thing that I've learned over time, when you have to use force, and it doesn't matter who it is or what circumstance, it never looks good, and it's really hard for humans when you're faced with that to always be perfect and look good, trying to do something that's not designed to look good. So I think a lot of departments did the right thing. We're currently having protests right here where I am, and so we've done everything possible to let people protest peacefully, and they've been peaceful. They've been loud. We hear the message. But we didn't have the kind of behavior which we've seen out there. So I will hope that the protests become less frequent, or let me put it this way: I hope the protests always stay nonviolent. That's what I truly hope.
Mm-hmm. And when is it okay for an officer to use force on someone?
Well, I mean, use of force is pretty much it. Officers are trained for the most part that you only use that amount of force which is necessary to effect the arrest, right? What you're arresting the person for, or to stop, the behavior it is that you're trying to address, and that's it. Only that amount of force that's necessary. Unfortunately, when you're in scenarios where people are using deadly force or potentially deadly force on you, well, that's the level of force that we can use in return to either stop that or to protect someone's life. So it's really relative. If you're not putting up any resistance, well, the amount of force that we need to arrest a subject is very minimal, if none at all, other than just putting handcuffs on the person. If you do put up resistance, then we raise a level of force to match, or that amount of resistance that occurs. So our level of use of force, I should say, our use of force is always based on what the subject is doing, not based on what we're doing.
Mm-hmm. I do want to touch on tactical training. Recently, outside of your department, there was an Ypsilanti Township woman who was punched in the face several times by a county deputy. And then back in 2014, there was a person named Ara Rosser, I believe, who was shot after holding up a knife to police. So I'm curious, what type of training do Ann Arbor police officers go through, especially when it comes to de-escalating situations like that?
So here in Ann Arbor, the officers go through quite a bit of training. We go through de-escalation training, unbiased policing training, procedural justice training, community policing training, how to work with people who are autistic training, obviously tactical training, dealing with tasers, use of force. We have a whole host of training, but the emphasis, or the main majority of our emphasis here in Ann Arbor, is basically on community-oriented training. How to deal with the community, how to de-escalate, problems with the community or subjects that we might run across, dealing with people that may or may not have mental illness. That's the focus of what we do and how we try to go about it. And it's some of the incidents you referred to was certainly long before my tenure here, maybe 5 years ago. Yeah. And so I can't speak to the training back then, but I do know certainly now that's the training we have, and probably since that incident, that's probably what's been emphasized here. As a matter of fact, I do know now we are a community-oriented police force. So everything that we do is really based around what we think the community expects and wants from us. And then we're seeking input from the community on the things that they believe that we might need training in, and emphasizing trainings and topics that are, quite, I wouldn't say quite popular, but topics that are relevant to what's going on in today's world. To make sure that we are policing the city of Ann Arbor in an appropriate way. And making sure that the officers understand, first and foremost, that we're here to serve the public, and that we're doing it in a respectful and right way. So.
Mm-hmm. Now, the video had surfaced about George Floyd and his arrest, and how the officer put a knee to his neck. Mm-hmm. I'm curious, does the Ann Arbor Police Department ever implement the same type of training where an officer will put a knee to someone's neck? And I guess at what point would that be okay, or why would an officer do that?
So I won't be certain. I can't speak to Minnesota or their training regarding their use of force, but it would be. It's highly likely that it would be inappropriate for officers to ever do that outside of what the last category of use of force, which would be, if we were at the level of use of force where we would have to use our gun or to stop a person. Mm-hmm. But it is, we do not train it. We don't endorse it. For someone who's not giving any resistance and anything of that nature, we would never, ever do it. Mm-hmm. It would be not only improper, it would be criminal. So that is not something that I don't think we would ever have to worry about here in Ann Arbor.
Mm-hmm. I do want to sidestep for a moment because you have a very remarkable and rare combination of experiences that I think would be very valuable to hear right now. We reported that you previously worked in Boston and you were an undercover officer at one point, and your fellow officers mistook you for a Black gang member, and then you were beaten and you were harassed. And after that, you were quoted that you were very aware of bad policing in the world and that your career is dedicated to making sure that these things don't happen. Again, very unique situation where you've been on both sides. Can you share what went through your mind and how that experience encouraged you to establish appropriate training with the Ann Arbor Police Department as you're leading it now?
Yeah. So I mean, it happened quite a few years ago. But I will say that I think my first reaction was to quit. I think my first reaction was to separate myself from policing. And actually, upon being harassed, it was many years ago, and started getting harassed at my home and stuff, I realized people were wanting to chase me away from a profession that I signed up for to help people. And then it hit me that, me leaving would probably be the worst thing that could probably ever happen. Not for myself personally, because I'm sure I could have gotten another job. That wasn't the issue. But it's really for the police department and or policing in general. I mean, you need people, and they are there, but you absolutely need people that are willing to look inside and look inward and look around and call people on the injustices that are going on in a place, and then make them fix it, or at least participate in fixing it. And so either you're, part of the solution, or maybe you're part of the problem. And so for me, I wanted, I mean, I was like a person on a mission. I wanted to solve the problem. I didn't advertise it. I didn't talk about it, but I just did things to make sure that I was prepared to address these issues. I went back to school. I went to any and every kind of training that there were. I tried to be as professional as possible, and I spent, the rest of my career there, trying to absolutely advocate, training, development of officers, rules, procedures, anything and everything that would make our police department better, as well as outreach with the community in which we serve. And so it was certainly a moment in my life, which I decided that the best thing that I could do was to take that negative energy from this event that was pretty horrific at the time, and then do something about the hurt that I was feeling. And that's what I've done. And that's what I still kind of do. I do love this profession in the sense that we help people, and once you've gotten a taste of what it's like to help so many different people that truly need your help, you realize the importance of it, and it makes you feel good and sleep well at night. So that's how I learned from that experience. And that's what I've tried to spend, the remainder of my career doing.
Great. Well, thank you for talking about that. So sometimes, in situations, officers will face moments that may trigger some emotion for them. How are your officers trained to prevent their emotions or even any unconscious biases they may have from taking over, any sort of training or cases that they handle?
So, part of the unbiased policing, courses and classes we teach them, we all have biases. I mean, just every human has them. And so, by going through that with them and helping them understand that, that they will have a bias, that they do have temperature, a temper, that they do have some faults and flaws like all humans do, but to recognize that, they have a duty and responsibility to not act on those. Right. So it's really important inwardly to understand what your issues are. So when you feel yourself getting upset, when you feel yourself getting mad, there's some things you can do personally to de-escalate yourself from that issue, whether it's to create distance, whether to ask another partner to step in and do something. But the reality is we've spent time, trying to make sure that officers have options. And that's the key. You have options other than use of force or violating someone's rights in another way. And, I think that's important for, not only, our field, but every, field. When you deal with people, you should understand what your options are, other than the worst case scenario or whatever that might mean.
Mm-hmm. And can you maybe address some solutions? Like what solutions are available to address chaotic situations, like some of the protests that we've seen? I know, you touched on Ann Arbor not really having too much chaos in the recent protests, but just down the road in Detroit, there were a lot of things that we've seen. So solutions that you have in mind?
Well, I don't know if there is a solution. The biggest solution, I guess people would say, is if police don't, violate the civil rights of people, there won't be any protests, and therefore there won't be any reason for police to show up to events of that nature. And I guess that's the simplest solution. But I would say, some of the solutions, and this is not really in regards to protests, but this is in regards to policing in general. I think police departments really, really, really need to emphasize training. And I believe that, the entities, the municipalities, the cities, the states that support them need to understand the importance of it as well. Training costs money. Money doesn't grow on trees. So, training should be emphasized, looking at the policies and procedures that we have to make sure that they're always up to date, that they're, in line with what today's world asks for and expects. That's really important. And there's another aspect of, I think, that's important for policing, is that the professional development of not only the officers, but more importantly for the leadership within police departments. It's really important to have leaders that understand how to communicate to the people that they're leading the importance of the rules that they have, the regulations that they have, and more importantly, the goals of the organization. And that doesn't always come easy. I would say that there's no shortage of rules in police departments everywhere, even places that have had trouble with their communities. But I would say where we fail is some of the leadership where we don't own the responsibility that we have to make sure that the people that are under us are doing all the things that they're supposed to do to keep everyone safe. And I think that's really, really important. Professional development, not only of the officers, but of the highest levels of the organization. We know a lot about the laws. We know a lot about how to affect an arrest. We know a lot about those things. But learning actually how to get people to, follow up on the things we're supposed to do all the time, how to run organizations, some of that is a skill set that we don't always practice, or at least do the background to make sure that we're sufficiently good at it. Mm-hmm. And so, there's a lot of people that are. I don't want to take that away. There's tons of chiefs, department and commissioners that are quite skilled in how to run places. But I would say it's the layers in between that really we need to emphasize on as well. So those are just a few of the places as well as you talked about unbiased policing, making sure officers are trained in that all the time, and more importantly, making sure not every organization, but certainly every police department out there practices some form of community-oriented policing. The citizens are why we're here. We're here to serve. This is a service industry. If we don't understand, who we're here to serve and why we're here to serve, you can get lost sometimes, right? And sometimes you get lost in I'm here to apply rules, and I'm going to apply these rules and regulations on the citizens. The facts are these laws are here to help, because the citizens, required them, or legislated required it because the citizens wanted those, and that we need to listen and hear directly from the citizens on what it is that they want from us. Because we don't want to under police certain areas because we think we're supposed to if the citizens aren't asking for it. And we don't want to over police areas because we didn't seek the citizens' opinion on what it is that they want in their neighborhoods. So a combination of all of those things together, requiring uniform policies and uniform requirements with training across the board, as well as some of the development that I talked about, and community policing, I think the totality of those will certainly help our profession continue to grow and evolve.
Well, speaking of communities, as we know for years, but especially now, Black communities especially feel vulnerable. How do we improve law enforcement relationships with them?
It's about building trust. You know, we have a long history of probably over policing, as I just talked about, in some of these communities of color. But in some areas, it was, you know, that's what they asked for sometimes. Building trust takes being there and letting, letting the community get to know us and us getting to know the community in a way that will build trust. And it really takes really being consistent, being present, being able to listen, and actually have conversations, being able to actually take criticism. That's a tough thing, in this position that we're in. We do get a lot of criticism, but I don't know if we always hear it. We hear the voices, but I don't know if we take it to heart what's being said sometimes. And many places do actually do it. And I think right now, with Mr. Floyd's death, I certainly think, a lot of people are taken aback and actually listening to what's being said, because it's hurtful. I mean, it is so hurtful, what happened to that gentleman in their family. And it's words can't explain the depth of the hurt that did to the country and to police officers as well. Whether people want to hear it or not, we are human, and that was a horrible thing. So I would certainly say that we have a ways to grow, but we need to have the willingness to listen and to hear what people are saying and acknowledge when we're wrong and be willing to put the work in to fix the issues that we were just told about.
Mm-hmm. Similar question, a common response to the Floyd incident that I've received from several African Americans is, I'm tired and I'm worried I'm going to be next. How can, vulnerable communities heal and move on from something like that and just feel safer going forward?
I mean, it's difficult. I mean, there's a lot of trauma involved in this. Whether, as many times as it's been seen on TV, as much as it's been talked about, whether you live in the jurisdiction where it happened or you live on the other side of the country, you feel as though it's right down the street. You feel as though that could happen to you. And that's a difficult thing. Sometimes it takes time for people to feel better. But if on the, when people are alienated from the police, it's up to us to put our hand out first. It's up to us to try to reach out as much as possible. And, over time, I think people will reach back and take our hand, as long as we do everything possible to earn that trust. And that's the advice I would say to every department out there is that, we need to do everything possible to continue to earn the trust that's been violated, over the years in certain places. So,
do you feel any pressure at all from the Black community?
Pressure, it's difficult. I'll say pressure. So it's ironic. I am certainly a Black male. I know what it's like to certainly be the victim of police violence. I was before I joined the police department, I was a young, male as well. I understand those issues. But I'll put it this way, the police department, police departments throughout the country don't, have a monopoly on, I will say racism or dehumanizing people. I can, as a person of color, I've experienced a lot in a lot of different ways in a lot of different venues that had nothing to do with police. And so people sometimes their interactions with the police, it sticks with them, but it happens in so many different venues that sometimes people just get fed up, right? Particularly when it's the police. That's where they draw the line. But it happens in a lot of other venues. And it's something, as a country, we need to work on, acknowledge that it exists and then try to work on it. In every area, every field, we need to work on our relations with people and understanding how we impact each other. And so, no, I don't feel pressure, but I do feel bad sometimes. When I try to engage folks and they don't want to hear from me, all they see is blue, so to speak. And you're a cop, how can you do X? Well, I do it because, I love this job. I do it because I want to give back. I do it because I know all the good work that we do. I know all the good officers are out here doing this. And all the many fine places that have a lot of good officers out there doing this on a daily basis. But they see it more or less us against them. Everyone's wrong. Everyone's bad. And so, it makes me sad in some ways when I can't get through that. And, I just would like to be able to have a conversation with people, sometimes versus the lack thereof, because sometimes when people are hurt, emotional, they can't hear you. And so that's the part where I don't know if I feel pressure, but it is discerning and it is saddening to sometimes not be able to talk to people about my experiences. And what I'm really worried about is, when I first came on the police job, there weren't a lot of people of color in police departments. There wasn't very diverse. I worry that where we're going? Is that the future of policing? Because if we have such a negative stereotype, how do you, recruit and get young people to want to be on this job? I look at it as, if you want to make a difference, then sign up and come on board and help us change the place from the inside out. That's what I've been doing. And, we need more. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, Chief Cox, thank you. But before I let you go, is there anything that you wanted to add that I didn't ask you?
No, it is a horrific thing that happened to Mr. Lloyd. And, I am deeply sorry for that. I can only speak to the organization that I'm at now, and I'm blessed in many ways that they allowed me to come here to lead the organization. We're not perfect by no means, but we certainly strive to work towards perfection. We certainly strive to work towards, changing for the better, with the community's help and involvement. And so I would say that Ann Arbor is not different than a lot of other places, in the sense that is something that every police organization should be striving for if they're not. So I would say, hopefully, we're going to reach our hand out to the public. Hopefully they will reach back at some point, but along the way, we still welcome their feedback, and, we're looking to earn whatever trust has been lost. And the ones that already know us, we were looking to build on the trust that we've already gained going forward. But I thank you very much for having me on, and I'm just happy to serve. So.
Thanks again, and thanks for sharing all your personal stories with us.
All right, thank you.
Take care.